if I did an emergency stop, I'm pretty sure my face would be ripped off. Hello guys, welcome back to Car Obsession and welcome to another throwback review. Like last time, I'm using one of my cars, and this is a car which I believe is a little bit of an unsung hero in the hot hatch world, and that is the Mk2 SEAT Leon Cupra. Whether you like the exterior design or not, it is thanks to a man by the name of Walter De Silva. Now, he is responsible for designs such as the original Audi R8, the original Audi TT, and the third generation Volkswagen Scirocco. Those are good looking cars. He's also responsible for a few Alfa Romeo. So it's clear to see he knows his way around a pencil. So I can only presume that the day this was designed, he called in sick and perhaps an apprentice did it. Now that may sound really harsh, but that's merely my opinion, and this is my car after all, so I can be as mean as I like. Now, certain design cues I'm not too sure of. For example, the line that goes down the side of the car, yes, you could argue it's dynamic, it's sleek, it kind of gives a swooping effect, but this is the way how I see it, which is very cynical. So, the designer has started off here, doing well. Oh, the caffeine has lost its effect. Oh no, wait, no, what's happened? Oh, he's fallen asleep. Oh no, hang on, the caffeine's kicked back in and we're at the rear. Now that may sound really harsh, but that's merely my opinion, and I think it's safe to say I'm not sold on the looks. So with that in mind, let's move on. Step into the interior and you'll find that it doesn't exactly scream quality. Compared to, well, I must admit that does sound quite substantial. That does sound quite pleasing, quite solid. But the rest of the interior, compared to a Mk5 Golf GTI, it just feels a little bit cheap and a little bit bland in here. You do have a good amount of equipment. So I've got dual zone climate control, I've got cruise control, FM radio, CD player, aux. Now, some of these features may seem very basic in 2020, but don't forget this car is 13 years old. I've also got a multi-function steering wheel, bi-xenon headlights. So in regard to kit, this car isn't doing too badly. Just moving on to the steering wheel, I referred to it a few months ago. This has actually got the same steering wheel design and gear knob design as the 2006 SEAT Ibiza FR I used to own, albeit this has got Cupra badges and not FR badges. But the interior, yeah, it is a little bit plain in places, but I do like the gauges. So this car is a pre-facelift. The facelift had a smarter interior, it had a different steering wheel, different gear knob, and interestingly, instead of red stitching, it had white. I prefer red because it looks sportier, more aggressive and sexier in general. And I also prefer the instrument cluster in this car because, again, it looks sportier, whereas the facelift, it looks a little bit plain. But let's quickly finish off on the practical bits. I know, not very interesting, but this is a hatchback after all. So 2 cup holders in the middle, which do kind of get in the way when you're changing gear, but it's not as bad as what I've experienced in some other cars. The door bins aren't massive, but they're a decent enough size. Little cubby hole down here. Got a little, I actually think that's an ashtray. You can tell this is a car of a certain age, can't you? And you also have a glove box, which is pretty tiny, but at least you can fit in a pair of gloves. Close. Right, let's move on to the rear. As always, the driver's seat has been set for me. I'm 6'2", so I am, of course, a taller chap. Therefore, let's see how I get on. Now, for starters, knee room is quite limited. I've got literally a few millimeters left over. I can't even fit my index fingers between my knees and the seat. However, on the plus side, because the back of the seat has been sculpted inwards, it gives you extra space for your legs. So, to be honest, leg room, I don't really have much to complain about. And to be honest, once I stretch out, I do actually have a bit more knee room. So if I sit like that, that's actually no good. If I actually stretch out, that is better. And I can also fit my feet underneath the seat in front of me, even though this seat is set to its lowest. So space back here isn't amazing, but I wouldn't say it's really bad either. Headroom is also pretty agreeable. I've probably got about an inch or so left over. One thing I will say though, is if you have claustrophobia, you may find it a little bit cramped back here, purely because the windows aren't exactly tall and they are tinted, which means that not a lot of light is coming in. And of course, you also have this dark roof lining. So yeah, if you are someone that feels like you get a bit hemmed in when you're in the back of cars, this may not be the car for you. I think you'd struggle to fit 3 adults in here, but of course 2 adults would be fine. And the outer seats have actually got a little bit of bolstering to them. So when you're being thrown around by the driver, you actually have a bit of support, which I quite like. One thing I don't like though is the lack of practicality. So there's no door bins, which is quite annoying and quite surprising. There's no centre armrest, but that would normally have cup holders or maybe a bit of extra storage. So there's no centre armrest, and you only get one cubby hole, which is down here. And if anything, I think this has been designed for CDs, judging by the slots. Of course, like I said, this car's 13 years old, so it's kind of a sign of the times. You wouldn't find this kind of cubby hole in a brand new car. Open up the boot like so, and you'll be greeted by 341 litres, which is pretty usable, but to be honest, it's not quite as much as the Ford Focus ST, the Volkswagen Golf GTI, or the Honda Civic Type R from the same era. But yeah, it's still a pretty usable space. Yes, there is quite a drop into the boot, so if you have bigger or heavier items, it may be a little bit of a faff to lift them up, over and into the boot. But on the plus side, you do get a nice deep boot, so it gives you more space, I suppose. You also get a little cubby hole here with a bit of netting, which will stop your smaller items from flying about the boot as you have a hoon along. Speaking of which, let's speak about the performance. Enough about practicality. Practicality is boring. Blah, 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 practicality. Ah, finally, the good bit, the engine, the power, the performance, the power plant. I'm getting carried away, aren't I? Anyway, there is a fair amount to get carried away with, because this is a 2-litre turbocharged 4-cylinder petrol engine, which offers 240 horsepower along with 300 newton meters of torque, or if you prefer that in old money, that is 221 pound-feet. This power is mated to the front wheels via a 6-speed manual gearbox. Unlike the Golf, you couldn't have this with a DSG, so it was 6-speed manual or nothing. In regard to performance, this will hit 62 miles per hour in 6.4 seconds, and the top speed is 153 miles per hour. Anyway, before I get blown away by Mother Nature, let's get in the car and have a drive. Oh, this wind is a nightmare. Let's fire it up. Oh yes. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. Right, let's see what this car can do. Oh, that's the speed limit already. Oh, and that's deer. Any more? Nope. Okay, I'm good to continue. Oh, the performance this thing offers as standard is fantastic. I've really missed a turbocharged car. Excuse the silly noises, but it's nice to have a car with boost again. And although this car's got the larger turbocharger compared to the Golf GTI, so this has got the K04 turbo, whereas the Golf has the K03, there's not much in the way of turbo lag. Yes, from what I've read, the K03 turbo is more responsive, but it is a smaller turbo. Now, I have driven a Mk5 Golf GTI, but that was quite a long time ago, and that was only for a brief period. I actually test drove one because quite some time ago I was thinking about buying one, but that's quite a few years ago actually. But anyway, that was then, this is now, and onto the Leon Cupra. The boost comes in at about, I'd say, around 2,500 revs, and it just keeps going until you get to, I'd say, late 6,000s, early 7,000s, and it just keeps pulling. It's impressive. And these cars have also got a good tuning potential. A stage 1 will push this car up to 300 horsepower with 420 newton meters of torque. And it'll be interesting to see how this car copes with that, bearing in mind it hasn't got a limited slip differential. So this car, although it feeds its power to the front wheels, and it has that amount of power, there's no LSD. So you may think that this car is just torque steer city, and that you just get a lot of wheel spin. Now, granted, yes, if you drive this car a bit exuberantly, particularly in the wet, you will get a fair amount of wheel spin. But as long as you're careful with the throttle, you won't really get that. Triggered the traction control through there. Brilliant. In regards to torque steer, whilst I've been owning the car, I've had this for about just over a week now, I've not detected any. There is maybe a little bit, but none that's really worth documenting. However, once this car has been remapped, that will probably be a different story. One thing I will say about this car though, is that the chassis, it does like to follow the imperfections in the road a little bit. It does like to follow the camber, and you do get a bit of tram lining here and there, but that's really only a problem on quite beaten up roads, and there are a few of them around Goodwood. Now, of course, you can't speak about a hot hatch without speaking about the handling. The handling isn't exactly playful, but it is sure-footed and capable. It's very competent. There's a good amount of grip despite the lack of a limited slip differential. The steering has got a decent amount of weight to it. It is a little bit on the light side for my liking, but I must admit I like my steering setup quite heavy. So that's not really a massive complaint for me. But the communication is pretty good. The feedback is also decent. And yeah, it's pretty direct as well. Not the most direct I've ever had in a hatchback, if I'm going to be honest, but it does a good enough job of getting me around the corners. And that's really all I can ask for from a hot hatchback. Well, that and performance, of course, and practicality and looks. Okay, handling is just one of quite a few important things about a hot hatchback, but the Leon Cupra does it well. It doesn't sing and dance about it, so the chassis isn't as playful as the EP3 Civic Type R I used to have, and for what it's worth, this car, compared to the Type R I used to own, weighs over 170 kilograms more. 170. That is quite a large difference. So this, if I'm not mistaken, is 1,375 kilograms. And that's not exactly lightweight for a car like this. There are heavier hot hatchbacks, but does this car feel heavy though? In comparison to my EP3, yes. But take the EP3 out of the equation. So let's just quickly thread the car through here. God, that grip is very good. That is definitely capable. So there is a little bit of body roll, I won't lie, and I definitely think that's down to the car's weight. But it still feels assured in the corners, and that's what you want from a hot hatchback, isn't it? Now, of course, a trade-off with that is the ride. I won't lie, the ride in this car is firm. It's firmer than the Type R I had, and it's also firmer than a few other hot hatchbacks I've driven. When I say it's hard or crashy, no, but you will notice the ride, particularly at lower speeds around town. The ride becomes quite lumpy and quite jiggly. It is a busy setup. Would I call it uncomfortable? No, I wouldn't, but if you want something that's more compliant, to be honest, this may not be a car for you. But one thing I will say, these seats are very comfortable. They are very supportive. The bolstering is quite thick actually, so if you are someone of a more broader stature, you may find these seats may feel a bit small for you, but I'm quite a slim guy, therefore the bolstering feels spot on actually. Let's speak about the gear change. This 6-speed manual gearbox is pretty decent. It's not the slickest change I've ever used in a hot hatchback, but it's got a nice weight to it. The action is quite nice, maybe a little bit long if I'm going to be picky. And unlike the Type R, where to change gear it was kind of one swift, slick action, This is kind of like a two-stage change, if that makes sense. So it's kind of like kadunk into gear, kadunk. It's kind of two stages. I wouldn't call it notchy because I think that would be rude, but it's not the slickest change. However, I still think it is a good gear change, not the best out there. I must admit, the speed I can carry through the corners in this car is more than I thought it'd be, to be honest. But this car's got Goodyear Eagle F1 tyres on the front and Pirelli P0 Neros, I think, on the rear axle. So this has got some good quality rubber on the alloys. I mentioned earlier this car doesn't have a limited slip differential. However, the facelift model got something called XDS, which is basically the Volkswagen Automotive Group's way of saying it had an electronic diff, which I believe is simply torque vectoring. So I don't think it actually had a mechanical limited slip diff, it was just torque vectoring. So obviously, well, for those of you that don't know what torque vectoring is, when you're going through a corner, if the inside wheel is losing traction and therefore it's just spinning away, not doing very much, the car's computer will brake that wheel or limit the amount of power going to it, which will of course limit the wheel spin and give it more traction. Now, I want to speak about the brakes because they are fantastic. Let me demonstrate. I put the anchors on. Oh, that wasn't even an emergency stop. If I did an emergency stop, I'm pretty sure my face would be ripped off. That's how good these brakes are. And if anything, one could argue these brakes are a little bit too good. They do feel just a tad over assisted. Now, from what I've read on the internet, this car was meant to have, well, this car was tested with Brembo brakes, but apparently, don't quote me, apparently the brake discs were warping and therefore it didn't suit this car. That means instead, this car's got the same brake setup as the Golf R32 and the Audi S3. And yeah, the brakes work pretty well. I do think this is a good car. Yes, it isn't perfect, and I wouldn't say this is the best driver's hot hatch you can buy, but it's capable, it's competent, and it's just overall a pretty solid choice. Maybe not your first choice, and to be honest, it wasn't my first choice, but it just ticked a lot of boxes for me. Oh, classic Mini, lovely. And I do wonder why you don't see more of these on the road. Is it because of the looks? For what it's worth, quite a lot of my friends and family like the styling on this car, and I'll be honest, I'm not a big fan of it. Yeah, it may grow on me, but I'm not too sure. I much prefer the other Leons, the Mark 1, the Mark 3, and the brand new one, the Mark 4. But maybe it's because this car is a bit of an ugly duckling. Maybe that's why some people haven't bought it. Well, some people didn't buy it back when it was brand new. Or is it because the Mk5 Golf GTI was the one that got the spotlight and was so well regarded that people didn't want to give this car a look? Or was it just a case of badge snobbery? I think there's a lot to like about the Mk2 SEAT Leon Cupra. I do wonder why this is a car that gets overlooked. Is it the styling, or is it the fact that this car simply lives in the shadows of the Mk5 Golf GTI? Don't get me wrong, the GTI is a fantastic car. It is a very good all-rounder, but I personally wanted something a little bit different. I wanted something with a bit more spice, a bit more flair. And I think the Cupra is perfect for that, because you are essentially getting a faster, a bit more sportier Golf GTI. So I think this fits the bill very nicely. Thank you so much for watching this video. I do hope you have enjoyed it. If so, be sure to like, subscribe and comment. If you are subscribed, don't forget to click the bell icon so you get notified every time I make a video. But until the next time, guys, be sure to keep up the car obsession.